Have you ever noticed something strange about your life? Every time something good begins, it somehow falls apart. Not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly. A relationship starts off amazing. Easy conversations, genuine connection, everything feels right. And then, out of nowhere, you start overthinking. You question small things. You pull away just a little. Maybe you say something you didn't mean. Maybe you stop showing up the way you used to. And before you even understand what happened, it's gone. Or maybe it's not a relationship. Maybe it's an opportunity. A job that could change your life. A project you were excited about. A chance to finally move forward. And at first, you feel motivated, focused, ready. But then something shifts. You procrastinate. You lose momentum. You tell yourself you'll do it tomorrow. And somehow, tomorrow never comes. And then you sit there, looking at what could have been, asking yourself the same question again and again. Why does this keep happening to me? At some point, it starts to feel like bad luck. Like life is just unfair. Like things are always almost right, but never fully work out. But what if that's not the truth? What if the reason things keep falling apart isn't because of life? What if it's because of you? Not in a way that blames you. Not in a way that makes you feel broken, but in a way that reveals something most people never realize. Because the truth is, many people don't lose good things. They slowly destroy them. Quietly. Unconsciously. And the scariest part is, it doesn't feel like destruction when it's happening. It feels normal. It feels like you're just reacting. Just protecting yourself. Just being careful. Just thinking things through. But underneath all of that, something else is happening. Something deeper. You start to hesitate when things get real. You pull back when things get close. You lose interest when things become stable. You find problems where there were none. And over time, those small moments begin to add up. Until one day, the thing you once cared about is gone. And you don't fully understand why. This is what makes it so confusing. Because you don't wake up and decide, I'm going to ruin this. You don't consciously choose to lose something meaningful. It happens in subtle ways. Invisible ways. Ways that feel like instinct. And that's exactly why it keeps repeating. Because if you can't see the pattern, you can't break it. And here's the part most people never talk about. Self-sabotage doesn't look like failure. It looks like hesitation. It looks like doubt. It looks like losing motivation at the wrong time. It looks like overthinking something simple until it becomes complicated. It looks like protecting yourself so much that you push away the very thing you wanted. And the more this happens, the more it shapes your identity. You start to believe, maybe I'm just not good at relationships. Maybe I'm not disciplined enough. Maybe I just can't keep good things in my life. But those beliefs are not the truth. They are the result of patterns you never learned to see. Because deep down, this isn't about discipline. It's not about intelligence. And it's definitely not about luck. It's about something much more subtle. The way you think. The way you respond to uncertainty. The way you handle things that matter to you. Because ironically, the more something matters, the more likely you are to sabotage it. Not because you don't want it, but because part of you doesn't know how to handle it, doesn't trust it, or doesn't believe it will last. So instead of risking the pain of losing it later, you slowly disconnect from it now. And that's the pattern. Not destruction, but disconnection. And until you understand why that happens, it will keep happening. Again, and again, and again. But once you see it, everything begins to change. Because for the first time, you realize you were never unlucky. You were just repeating something you didn't even know existed. And in this video, we're going to break that pattern down, piece by piece, so you can finally understand why you keep ruining good things in your life. And more importantly, how to stop. If you look back at your life carefully, not just at what happened, but how it happened, you might begin to notice something unsettling. The same story, repeating itself. Different people, different situations, different timing. But somehow, the ending feels familiar. Things start well. There's excitement, curiosity, energy. You feel present, engaged, hopeful. And then, without any obvious reason, something begins to shift. Not all at once. Not in a way that's easy to point at. But gradually, almost invisibly, you start to feel a little less interested. A little less certain. A little more distant. You don't text back as quickly. You stop putting in the same effort. You begin to question things that didn't bother you before. You notice flaws you once ignored. You feel unsure about something that once felt right. And at first, this feels normal. Because your mind gives you reasons. It's just not the same anymore. Maybe this isn't right for me. I need to think about this. And those thoughts feel logical. They feel justified. They feel like you're being careful, thoughtful, aware. But what you don't realize is that something deeper is happening beneath those thoughts. You're not just thinking differently. You're slowly disconnecting. This is the invisible pattern. Self-sabotage doesn't show up as a dramatic decision. It doesn't look like, I'm going to ruin this relationship. I'm going to throw this opportunity away. Instead, it looks like a series of small shifts, small withdrawals, small moments where you choose distance over connection. And each of those moments seems insignificant on its own. But together, they create a direction, a movement away from something that once mattered. And because it's so gradual, you don't notice it while it's happening. You only notice it when it's too late. When the relationship feels cold. When the opportunity is gone. When the motivation has disappeared. And then you look back and wonder, what changed? But the truth is, it wasn't one big change. It was 100 small ones. And this is why the pattern is so hard to break. Because it doesn't feel like a pattern. It feels like life. It feels like natural emotion. It feels like you're simply responding to how things evolve. But if you zoom out, if you look at your experiences as a whole instead of individually, you begin to see something different. A rhythm, a cycle. You get close, then you pull away. You get excited, then you lose interest. You move forward, then you hesitate, again and again. And the most important part of this pattern is this. It often begins at the exact moment things start to become real, not at the beginning. The beginning is easy. The beginning is exciting. There's no risk yet, no expectations, no emotional investment. But as soon as something starts to matter, that's when the shift happens. Because when something matters, it becomes vulnerable. It becomes something you could lose, something that could hurt you, something that could fail. And your mind reacts to that possibility. Not consciously, but instinctively. It starts looking for problems. It starts questioning. It starts protecting. And that protection creates distance. You begin to hold back. Just a little. You stop being as open. You stop being as invested. You create space between you and the thing that matters. Because that space feels safer. It gives you control. It reduces the risk of getting hurt. But at the same time, it also reduces the connection. And connection is what keeps things alive. So as you protect yourself, you slowly weaken the very thing you're trying to keep. This is the paradox of self-sabotage. You're not trying to destroy anything. You're trying to protect yourself. But the way you protect yourself is what ends up causing the damage. And because your intentions feel right, you don't question your behavior. You assume, I'm just being careful. I'm just thinking things through. I'm just responding to how I feel. But those feelings are not random. They are part of a pattern that has likely been shaped over time, by past experiences, by disappointment, by moments where things didn't work out. Your mind remembers those experiences, and it learns something from them. Not always the right lesson, but a powerful one. It learns that good things don't last, that getting too close leads to pain, that trusting something fully is risky. So the next time something good appears, your mind doesn't just see the present, it also sees the past, and it tries to protect you from repeating it. That's why the pattern feels automatic. Because it is. It's not something you actively choose. It's something you've learned. And anything learned can become a habit, even if that habit works against you. And over time, this pattern becomes part of your identity. You begin to expect things to fall apart. You begin to assume that something will go wrong. You begin to approach good things with caution instead of openness. And that mindset shapes your behavior in subtle ways. Ways you don't always notice, but ways that matter. Because every time you hesitate instead of act, every time you pull back instead of lean in, every time you disconnect instead of stay present, you reinforce the pattern. You make it stronger. You make it more automatic. Until eventually, it feels like that's just who you are. Someone who can't keep good things. But that's not the truth. You're not someone who loses good things. You're someone who learned how to disconnect from them without realizing it. And once you see that, once you understand that this is not random, but patterned, everything begins to shift. Because patterns can be broken, but only when they become visible. And now, for the first time, you're starting to see it. Which leads to a deeper question. If you're not consciously choosing to ruin things, then why does your mind keep pulling you in that direction? What is it actually trying to protect you from? Because once you understand that, you don't just see the pattern, you understand the reason behind it. And that's where real change begins. Now that you've started to see the pattern, there's a deeper question that naturally follows. If you're not consciously choosing to ruin things, then why does it keep happening? Why does your mind pull away the moment something starts to feel real? Why do you hesitate when things are going well? Why does stability sometimes feel uncomfortable? The answer is not what most people expect. It's not a lack of discipline. It's not because you're careless. And it's definitely not because you don't want good things in your life. It's because, on a deeper level, you don't fully trust them. Not the way you think you do. Because trusting something doesn't just mean wanting it. It means believing it will last. Believing it's safe. Believing it won't hurt you. And for many people, that belief simply isn't there. Not completely. Not consistently. Not deeply enough to feel at ease. So when something good enters your life, your reaction is not just excitement. It's tension. A quiet, almost invisible tension. At first, it's subtle. You might not even notice it. But it's there. A small voice in the back of your mind that says, "This feels too good. This might not last. What if something goes wrong?" And that voice doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from experience. From everything you've lived through. Every time something didn't work out. Every time you trusted something and it fell apart. Every time you let your guard down and got hurt. Your mind learned something from those moments. It created a rule. A belief. Not always a conscious one, but a powerful one. Good things don't last. And once that belief exists, it changes how you experience everything that comes after. Because now, when something good happens, you don't just see it for what it is. You see it through the lens of that belief. You expect it to end. You anticipate the loss before it even happens. And that anticipation creates anxiety. Not loud anxiety. Not obvious panic. But a quiet unease. A sense that something is off. Even when everything seems fine. And the mind doesn't like uncertainty. It doesn't like waiting for something bad to happen. So instead of sitting with that discomfort, it tries to resolve it. It tries to regain control. And this is where self-sabotage begins to make sense. Because if you believe something will eventually fall apart, then, unconsciously, you'd rather be the one who causes it. Why? Because it feels better to control the ending than to be surprised by it. It feels safer to create distance now than to be hurt later. So you begin to act in ways that align with that belief. Not on purpose, but automatically. You question things that don't need to be questioned. You look for signs that something is wrong. You interpret neutral situations as negative. You overanalyze small details. You create doubt where there was none. And slowly, that doubt begins to change your behavior. You become less open, less trusting, less present. You hold back parts of yourself. You don't fully invest. You keep one foot out the door, just in case. And that just in case becomes a barrier. A barrier between you and the experience. Between you and the person. Between you and the opportunity. And over time, that barrier grows. Until eventually, the connection weakens. The opportunity fades. The thing that once felt good no longer feels the same. And then it ends. And when it does, your belief is reinforced. See, I knew it wouldn't last. But what you don't realize is this. It didn't end because it was destined to fail. It ended because your belief shaped your behavior. And your behavior shaped the outcome. This is the hidden loop. You don't trust good things. So you act in ways that create distance. That distance weakens the connection. The connection falls apart. Which proves your belief was right. And the cycle continues. Again, and again, and again. This is why it's so hard to break. Because from your perspective, it feels like reality. It feels like you're simply observing how things unfold. But in reality, you are participating in that unfolding. You are influencing it in ways that are subtle, but powerful. And the most difficult part of this truth is this. You can want something deeply and still not trust it at the same time. You can crave love and still push it away. You can desire success and still sabotage your progress. Because desire and belief are not the same thing. Desire says, "I want this." But belief says, "I don't think I can keep this." And belief always wins. Because belief shapes behavior, and behavior shapes reality. So until that belief changes, the pattern continues. No matter how much you want things to be different. This is why some people feel confused by their own actions. They say, "I don't know why I did that. I don't know why I pulled away. I don't know why I lost interest." But underneath those actions, there is always a reason, a belief, a quiet assumption about how things will end. And once you begin to see that, you start to understand something important. You're not broken. You're not self-destructive. You're responding to something your mind believes is true. Even if that belief is outdated. Even if it no longer serves you. even if it's not actually accurate anymore. Your mind doesn't know that yet. It's still operating based on what it learned before. And that's why awareness matters so much. Because once you recognize this pattern, once you see how your lack of trust influences your behavior, you gain something you didn't have before. Choice. The ability to pause, to question your reactions, to notice when doubt is coming from the past instead of the present. And that moment of awareness is where the pattern begins to weaken. But there's another layer to this. Because not only do you struggle to trust good things, in many cases, you don't even feel comfortable with them. And that discomfort leads to something even deeper, something most people never realize. Because sometimes, it's not just that you don't trust peace. It's that you're not used to it at all. And when something feels unfamiliar, your mind doesn't just question it. It tries to escape it, which leads to the next part of this pattern. And this is where things become even more revealing. If you've ever wondered why you feel restless when things are finally calm, this is where the answer begins to reveal itself. Because for many people, the problem isn't just that they don't trust good things. It's that they don't feel comfortable when life becomes peaceful. And that sounds strange at first, because peace is what everyone says they want. A stable relationship, a steady career, a calm mind, no drama, no stress, no chaos. That's the goal, right? But here's the uncomfortable truth. If you've spent most of your life in stress, uncertainty, or emotional turbulence, peace doesn't feel natural. It feels unfamiliar. And anything unfamiliar feels unsafe to the mind. You see, your brain doesn't prioritize happiness. It prioritizes familiarity. It wants what it recognizes, what it has experienced before, even if that experience wasn't good for you. So if you grew up around tension, if you're used to pressure, if your life has always been a cycle of highs and lows, then chaos becomes your baseline. Not consciously, but subconsciously. It becomes what your system expects, what it understands, what it knows how to navigate. Because chaos, in a strange way, is predictable. There's always something happening, something to react to, something to fix, something to worry about. And when that constant movement disappears, when things finally become still, your mind doesn't immediately relax. It becomes alert, almost suspicious. It starts asking, why is it so quiet? What am I missing? What's about to go wrong? And that question, what's about to go wrong, is the beginning of the shift. Because when your mind expects something to go wrong, it starts looking for it. Even if it's not there, you begin to scan your environment for problems. You analyze tone, behavior, small details. You interpret neutral things as negative. You create meaning where there might not be any. And slowly, you start to feel tension again, even in a situation that was originally peaceful. This is how chaos begins to re-enter your life. Not because it was always there, but because your mind recreated it. And this doesn't just happen internally. It shows up in your actions too. You might pick unnecessary arguments, bring up issues that weren't really issues, test people without realizing it, push boundaries just to see how someone reacts. Not because you want conflict, but because conflict feels familiar. It gives you something to hold on to, something you understand. And when things are calm, you lose that reference point. You don't know how to exist in that space. So unconsciously, you try to change it. This is what people mean when they say someone is addicted to chaos. Not addicted in a conscious, intentional way, but conditioned to it, used to it, dependent on it for a sense of normalcy. And the most dangerous part of this pattern is this. It disguises itself as intuition. You tell yourself, something feels off. This isn't right. I don't feel the same anymore. And those feelings seem real, because they are real, but they're not always accurate. They're not always a reflection of the situation. They're often a reflection of your internal state, of what you're used to, of what your mind expects. So instead of asking, is something actually wrong here? You immediately assume, there must be something wrong. And that assumption shapes your behavior. You pull back. You become less open, less trusting, less engaged. And as that continues, the connection begins to weaken. Not because it was flawed, but because it was never given the chance to remain stable. This is why some people say they lose feelings when things become consistent. Not because the connection isn't real, but because consistency doesn't trigger the same emotional intensity as chaos. And if your system is used to intensity, consistency can feel like boredom, like something is missing, like the spark is gone. But this spark you're looking for might not be love. It might be anxiety. It might be unpredictability. It might be emotional highs and lows that you've learned to associate with meaning. So when those highs and lows disappear, it feels like something is wrong, when in reality, something is finally stable. This is one of the biggest illusions people fall into. They mistake peace for emptiness. They mistake stability for lack of passion. They mistake calm for something missing. And because of that, they walk away from things that could have been good for them. Not because those things were lacking, but because they didn't match the emotional pattern they were used to. And this doesn't only apply to relationships. It shows up in work, in goals, in personal growth. You start something new. You feel excited, motivated, driven. But as soon as things become routine, as soon as the initial excitement fades, you begin to lose interest. You feel restless. You look for something new, something more stimulating, something that brings back that intensity. And once again, you move away from stability, back toward chaos, back toward unpredictability, back toward something that feels more alive, even if it's less healthy. This is the cycle, not because you want instability, but because your system is calibrated to it. And until that calibration changes, you will continue to recreate the same pattern, no matter how much you want something different. This is why awareness is so important here. Because once you recognize that peace feels unfamiliar, you can begin to question your reactions. You can pause when you feel the urge to create tension. You can ask yourself, is something actually wrong, or am I just uncomfortable with things being calm? That question alone can change everything, because it creates space. Space between your feeling and your reaction. And in that space, you have a choice to repeat the pattern or to sit with the discomfort, to stay present, to allow stability to exist without trying to change it. And that's not easy because it requires you to tolerate something new, something unfamiliar, something your system isn't used to. But over time, that unfamiliar feeling begins to shift. What once felt strange starts to feel normal. What once felt uncomfortable starts to feel safe. And slowly, your baseline changes from chaos to calm, from tension to stability, from reaction to awareness. But there's still something deeper beneath all of this. Because even if you learn to sit with peace, even if you begin to trust stability, there's another force that can pull you back into the same pattern. A force that has nothing to do with chaos and everything to do with fear. Because sometimes, it's not just that you're used to chaos. It's that you're afraid of what will happen if things actually work out. And that fear is what we're going to uncover next. At this point, the pattern is becoming clearer. You've seen how you slowly disconnect. You've seen how you struggle to trust good things. You've seen how chaos can feel more familiar than peace. But underneath all of that, there's something even deeper. Something that explains why this pattern keeps repeating, even when you know what's happening. Because sometimes, the reason you ruin good things in your life isn't just habit. It's fear. Not the kind of fear that's obvious. Not the kind that makes you panic or run away instantly. But a quieter, more subtle kind of fear. The kind that hides behind logic, behind hesitation, behind thinking things through. It's the fear of what will happen if things actually go right. And that sounds contradictory at first. Because why would you fear something you want? Why would you sabotage something good? Why would you pull away from something meaningful? But the truth is, what you want often comes with something you're not ready to face. Because every good thing carries a weight, a responsibility, a level of exposure. And that's where the fear begins. Take success, for example. On the surface, it's everything people strive for. Progress, achievement, recognition. But beneath that, success also means pressure, higher expectations, more responsibility, more visibility, more chances to fail publicly, more to lose. And for some people, that's overwhelming. Because as long as you're trying to succeed, you can still imagine what success might look like. But the moment you actually get close to it, that imagination becomes reality. And reality demands something from you. Consistency, discipline, responsibility. And suddenly, what once felt exciting starts to feel heavy. So instead of stepping fully into it, you hesitate, you delay, you lose momentum. Not because you don't want success, but because part of you is afraid of what it will require from you. Now think about relationships. Deep connection, love, trust, intimacy. These are things people say they want more than anything. But real connection also means vulnerability. It means being seen, not just the good parts, but the parts you hide, the parts you're unsure about, the parts you're afraid might not be accepted. And that level of openness is uncomfortable. Because it removes control. You can no longer fully protect yourself. You can no longer hide behind distance. You are exposed. And with that exposure comes risk. The risk of rejection. The risk of disappointment. The risk of loss. So even if you want the relationship, part of you is holding back. Part of you is cautious. Part of you is trying to stay safe. And that safety often looks like distance. Like hesitation. Like pulling away just enough to avoid getting too close. But that distance also prevents the connection from deepening. So once again, you end up weakening the very thing you want. Not because you don't care, but because caring makes you vulnerable. And vulnerability feels dangerous. This is the paradox. The things that matter most to you are the things that require the most from you. Emotionally, mentally, personally. And if you're not ready for that level of responsibility, that level of exposure, your mind will try to protect you by slowing you down, by making you doubt, by making you hesitate. Because hesitation feels safer than commitment. Because staying in the almost feels safer than fully stepping in. As long as something is incomplete, you don't have to face its full reality. You don't have to carry its full weight. You don't have to risk losing it completely. So you stay in that space, that in-between space, where things are good, but not fully developed, where you're involved, but not fully committed, where you're close, but not completely open. And that space feels manageable, comfortable even, because it allows you to experience something without fully risking yourself. But it also keeps you from experiencing it completely. And over time, that limitation becomes the reason things don't last. Because anything that isn't fully nurtured eventually fades. Anything that isn't fully committed to eventually loses strength. Anything that isn't fully embraced never reaches its full potential. And that's where the cycle repeats. You get close, but not too close. You invest, but not fully. You care, but with hesitation. And eventually, it slips away. And when it does, it reinforces another belief. That's just how things go. But the truth is, that's how things go when you're afraid of what they require. Because fear doesn't always look like running away. Sometimes, it looks like slowing down at the exact moment you should move forward. Sometimes, it looks like overthinking something simple. Sometimes, it looks like convincing yourself that something isn't right, when in reality, you're just not ready for it. And that's what makes this pattern so difficult to recognize. Because your mind always gives you a reason, a logical explanation, a justification for why you're pulling back. And those reasons feel real. They feel valid. They feel like you're making a smart decision. But underneath those reasons, there's often something else. A discomfort, a resistance, a quiet fear of stepping into something that will change you. Because real growth, real connection, real success, they don't just add something to your life. They transform you. They ask more from you. They challenge you. They push you beyond what you're used to. And that transformation can feel overwhelming. So instead of embracing it, you stay where it's familiar. Even if that familiarity limits you. Even if that familiarity costs you something meaningful. And this is where the pattern becomes clear in a new way. It's not just about chaos. It's not just about trust. It's about readiness. Or more specifically, your perception of your own readiness. Because if you don't believe you can handle something, you will find a way to avoid it. Even if it's exactly what you want. Even if it's exactly what you need. And that avoidance will look like self-sabotage. But in your mind, it feels like protection. Protection from pressure. From responsibility. From vulnerability. From change. But here's the truth. Avoiding something doesn't remove its weight. It only postpones it. Because the things you avoid are often the things that would help you grow. And the longer you avoid them, the more the pattern repeats. Until one day, you begin to realize. It's not that life keeps taking things away from you. It's that you keep stepping away from them. Right before they become real. And once you see that, you can no longer pretend it's random. You can no longer blame circumstances alone. Because now you understand something deeper. The fear isn't of failure. It's of transformation. Of becoming someone who has to live differently. Think differently. Show up differently. And that realization brings you to the deepest layer of this pattern. Because beyond fear, beyond chaos, beyond trust, there is one more thing that quietly shapes everything. Something that determines what you allow into your life. And what you push away. And that is the way you see yourself. Because in the end, you don't just act based on what you want. You act based on what you believe you deserve. And that belief is what we're going to explore next. At the deepest level of this pattern, beyond the hesitation, beyond the fear, beyond the chaos, there is something much quieter. much more personal, and often much harder to face. It's not just that you don't trust good things. It's not just that you're afraid of what they require. It's that, somewhere inside you, you don't fully believe you deserve them. And that belief changes everything. Because no matter how much you say you want something, no matter how hard you try to reach it, no matter how close you get, if you don't believe you deserve it, you will find a way to let it go. Not consciously, not intentionally, but inevitably. Because your mind is always trying to create consistency between what you experience and what you believe about yourself. And if those two things don't match, something has to change, either your belief or your behavior. And for most people, it's easier to change their behavior, to adjust their actions, to move away from the thing that feels too good, because changing your belief about yourself requires something much deeper. It requires you to question the way you see yourself, the way you've defined your worth. And that's not easy, because that belief didn't come from nowhere. It was built over time, from experiences, from feedback, from moments that shaped how you see yourself. Maybe you were criticized more than you were encouraged. Maybe you were made to feel like you weren't enough, not smart enough, not attractive enough, not capable enough. Maybe you tried before and failed, and that failure stayed with you, quietly influencing how you see your own potential. Or maybe nothing dramatic happened at all. Maybe it was just a series of small moments, small doubts, small comparisons, small insecurities that slowly added up, until one day, you started to believe something about yourself. Something subtle, something unspoken, something like, I'm not the kind of person who gets to have that. And once that belief exists, it becomes a filter that shapes how you experience everything. So when something good enters your life, instead of fully embracing it, part of you feels uncomfortable. Not because the thing itself is wrong, but because it doesn't match your internal image of yourself. It feels too good, too stable, too aligned. And that creates tension. Because deep down, you're thinking, what if this isn't really meant for me? What if I can't keep this? What if they realize I'm not enough? And those thoughts don't always appear clearly. They don't always form as complete sentences. But they exist, in the background, influencing how you act, how you respond, how much of yourself you allow to be seen. And slowly, that internal doubt begins to shape your external behavior. You start to downplay your value. You hesitate to fully step into opportunities. You question whether you belong. You hold back in relationships. You avoid being fully seen. Because being fully seen means risking confirmation of your fear. The fear that maybe you're not enough. And that fear leads to subtle forms of self-rejection. You reject opportunities before they can reject you. You pull away from people before they can leave. You minimize your own success before anyone else can question it. And all of this happens quietly, without drama, without awareness, until one day, the opportunity is gone. The relationship fades. The moment passes. And once again, you're left wondering why. But this time, the reason is even deeper. Because this isn't just about patterns. It's about identity, about who you believe you are, and what you believe you're allowed to have. Because here's the truth. You can only hold on to things that match your sense of self. If something feels above that, if something feels out of alignment with how you see yourself, you will unconsciously bring it back down, back to what feels familiar, back to what feels believable, even if that means losing something good. This is why some people repeatedly end up in the same types of situations, the same kinds of relationships, the same level of success, the same emotional patterns, because it all aligns with what they believe they deserve. Not what they want, but what they believe is realistic for them. And until that belief changes, the pattern continues, no matter how many times the opportunity appears. Because the issue is not the opportunity, it's the identity. And this is where things become both difficult and powerful. Because changing your life at this level doesn't start with action. It starts with awareness, with recognizing the beliefs you've been carrying, the assumptions you've made about yourself, the quiet ways you've been limiting what you allow into your life. And that recognition is not always comfortable, because it means facing something you may have avoided for a long time. The possibility that the way you see yourself is not entirely true, that the version of yourself you've been holding on to is incomplete, outdated, or shaped by experiences that no longer define you. And once you begin to question that, something shifts. Because if your belief about yourself is not fixed, then neither is your pattern, neither is your behavior, neither is your outcome. And that realization opens the door to something new. The possibility that you don't have to keep repeating this cycle, that you don't have to keep losing things that matter, that you don't have to keep stepping away from what you want. But change at this level doesn't happen instantly. It doesn't happen by simply telling yourself, I deserve better. Because belief is not created through words alone. It's created through experience, through small moments where you act differently, where you choose to stay instead of pull away, where you choose to trust instead of doubt, where you allow yourself to receive something without immediately questioning it. And those moments feel uncomfortable at first because they go against what you're used to. But over time, they begin to reshape your identity. They begin to show your mind something new, that you can hold on to good things, that you can handle them, that you are not the person you once believed yourself to be. And slowly, that new belief becomes stronger, more stable, more real, until one day, it becomes your default. And when that happens, the pattern begins to break. Not because you forced it to, but because you are no longer the same person who created it. And that leads to the final realization, the one that brings everything together. Because once you understand the pattern, once you understand the fear, once you understand the belief, you arrive at a point where something changes. Not externally, but internally. A shift in awareness. A moment where you see things clearly for the first time. And that moment is where everything begins to turn. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And from that point on, you have a choice to keep repeating it or to finally step out of it. And that choice is what we're going to explore in the end. At this point, something should feel different. Not necessarily easier, not completely clear, but different. Because now, for the first time, you're not just looking at what's happening in your life. You're starting to understand why it keeps happening. You've seen the pattern, the slow disconnection, the hesitation when things become real, the quiet ways you pull away without realizing it. You've seen how trust plays a role, how your mind expects things to fall apart, and then behaves in ways that make that expectation come true. You've seen how chaos can feel more familiar than peace, how stability can feel uncomfortable, simply because it's not what you're used to. You've seen the fear, not of failure, but of what success, love, or growth would demand from you. And finally, you've seen the deepest layer of all, the belief about yourself, the quiet assumption of what you think you deserve. All of these pieces come together to form a pattern that doesn't just affect one part of your life, but everything. Your relationships, your opportunities, your progress, your sense of fulfillment. And for a long time, it may have felt like these things were happening to you, like life was unpredictable, unfair, random. But now you see something else. You see that there has been a structure to it, a repetition, a cycle, and more importantly, you see that you've been a part of that cycle, not as someone to blame, but as someone who has been operating on patterns they never questioned. And that realization is powerful because it changes your position. You're no longer just reacting to life. You're observing it. You're aware of it. And awareness is where everything begins. Because before awareness, there is no choice, only reaction, only habit, only repetition. But once you become aware, even slightly, you create space. Space between what you feel and what you do. Space between your instinct and your response. And in that space, something new becomes possible. Choice, the ability to pause, to notice when you're about to pull away, to recognize when doubt is coming from the past, not the present, to see when you're creating distance. Not because something is wrong, but because something feels unfamiliar. And in those moments, you don't have to react the way you always have. You don't have to follow the same script. You can do something small, but different. You can stay just a little longer. You can be open just a little more. You can choose not to overanalyze something simple. You can choose not to create a problem where there isn't one. You can choose to sit with the discomfort instead of escaping it. And those choices may seem small, insignificant even, but they are not, because patterns are not broken by big, dramatic changes. They are broken by small, consistent shifts. Moments where you interrupt the cycle. Moments where you choose awareness over instinct. And at first, it won't feel natural. It will feel uncomfortable, unfamiliar, maybe even wrong, because you're going against something that has been automatic for a long time. But that discomfort is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're doing something different. And different is where change lives. Over time, those small moments begin to add up, the same way your old pattern was built. Slowly, gradually, until one day, you notice something. You didn't pull away this time. You didn't overthink it into something complicated. You didn't lose interest for no reason. You stayed. You engaged. You allowed something to continue. And maybe for the first time, it didn't fall apart. Not because life suddenly became perfect, but because you showed up differently. And that's when you realize something important. You were never someone who ruins good things. You were someone who learned patterns that led to that outcome. And if those patterns can be learned, they can be unlearned, rewritten, replaced. Not instantly, but over time, with awareness, with patience, with a willingness to stay present even when it feels uncomfortable. And this doesn't mean everything will suddenly work out. It doesn't mean you'll never experience loss or disappointment again. But it does mean that you are no longer unconsciously creating that outcome. You are no longer repeating something you don't understand. You are no longer stepping away from things without knowing why. Instead, you are choosing, consciously, intentionally, and that changes everything. Because once you reach that point, life stops feeling like something that happens to you and starts feeling like something you participate in, something you shape, something you influence, not through control, but through awareness, through presence, through the way you choose to respond. And that is the turning point. Not perfection, not complete certainty, but awareness. Because awareness gives you the one thing you didn't have before, the ability to see yourself clearly. And when you can see clearly, you can act differently. And when you act differently, your life begins to change. Not all at once, but in ways that matter, in ways that last. So the next time something good enters your life, and you feel that familiar urge to hesitate, to question, to pull away, pause, just for a moment, and ask yourself, is this the pattern, or is this the truth? Because sometimes, the only thing standing between you and something meaningful is a version of yourself you no longer need to be. And the moment you realize that is the moment everything begins to shift.